I haven't got to say anything all day. I'm just about to bust. I wish this building was jam-packed. This work, the mission work, is so important. We're told to go all the world. And you're helping send 2 men from time to time. I told Justin I wanted to say a little bit about him, and I hope it's a little, because I want him to get up. We were trying to figure out the exact year that he started going to Uganda with me. We think it was 2018. Boy, you talk about a greenhorn. But you know what? It's amazing that he stuck with it because he had to deal with me.
Amen.
I teased him, I picked on him. Oh, you should have seen the first time, or maybe the second time, we were headed out and I was there and he hadn't got there yet. And I called him up and I said, you better hurry up. We're loading on the plane right now. And I was standing back watching. All of a sudden, here comes Justin running down the hall of that airport. And I was laughing so hard, I thought about letting him go, but I said, wait a minute, Justin, over here. What? I lied. But I really broke him in good. And maybe that's why he's still with us. You might be thinking, why in the world are you having Justin come and talk about Manna Project? You've been part of Manna Project the longest. You could tell us a lot. Well, I want a different perspective, a younger mind to be able to tell you, because I always mess up PowerPoints. I don't get the clearest pictures, and you'll see a good report tonight. If you haven't gotten one of these handouts explaining Manna Project, I wish you would, and it tells you in a nutshell what we're all about. I want to draw your attention to inside where Justin is standing with 2 Africans there. The one in the center is Museli Tom. And I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but he's going to be our new director at Rwenzori School of Preaching. And Busa, who helped start and was the first director and has done a mighty work, he is stepping down. And we investigated. It just happened that last trip, we went up to Kotoko where Tom preaches. We were so amazed at how he brings this team of young preachers to evangelize the area. And he brought in another group of young men to evangelize further to other places. He is a go-getter. And when the idea of replacing Mbusa came up, we both said, Tom! Didn't we? We have another man. Hankson is a graduate of this year's class, and he's going to be our farm manager. Well, guess what? We're planning for both Tom and Hankson to travel to Tanzania, to Talawanda School of Preaching, to find out and to see the good things that are happening at that school so they can implement them at Rwenzori School of Preaching. We want them to see what Maurice Gasper is doing there, and he'll help them. They're new. They'll get their foot on the ground in a great way, and they'll return to Uganda, and there probably won't be any holding them back. So that's our hopes. But now, Justin.
Appreciate that introduction. I am excited to be here with y'all, and excited to get to hear Greg's introduction. I'm glad you didn't say the things that I thought you might say when you introduced me. But excited to get to talk to y'all and update y'all about the Manna Project and the work that y'all have had fellowship in. And a lot of these facts I think y'all are already familiar with. The idea that at the Manna Project, our idea is to create congregations and works that we train the locals there and give them the tools and the skills to be self-sufficient, so they can go out to the villages and preach and support themselves with farming. They're not always dependent forever on American money. Because if that American money stops, those mission works also stop. But we want these works to be able to continue and go on. And that also means putting an end to all the different people on Facebook contacting you, asking you for money for this, that, and the other, because they're able to raise that money themselves, literally out of the ground. And of course, we understand the Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28, that we are to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And that's our imperative. We see the example of the early church in Acts chapter 8 and verse 4, that as those Christians were scattered, they went everywhere, and as they went preaching the word. And of course, Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 10, we understand that it is God's eternal purpose that His manifold wisdom might be made known by the church. And that's our job, to make the wisdom of God known to the world. And if we don't do it, who will? And we look at the Apostle Paul and his example, the way that he approached mission work. He went out under the elders there at Antioch, just like the elders here are sending out Greg, and the elders in Italia sending me. And he went and he taught tent making, literally tent making. And we see his work there at Ephesus, where he established a school and he was training men, and he sent them out into the surrounding towns and villages, teaching and preaching. And one of the things he reminded them of in Acts chapter 20 was that he told them that they ought to work with their hands, and that it's better, more blessed to give than to receive. And we want the brethren in these third world countries to have that blessing of being the givers and not just always the receivers. And so we're trying to follow Paul's pattern in preparing preachers to go out and do the work. These last couple of years have been difficult, haven't they? It's been easy to feel discouraged. It's been easy to feel alone and isolated with all the masks and the social distancing and the lockdown and the this and the that. It's been easy to be discouraged. And carrying out the Great Commission has been a little bit difficult. Nobody wants you knocking on their door during a pandemic. And yet, when we received that commission, we also received a promise. Jesus said, I will be with you always. Even to the end of the world, even when the world's falling apart, I'll be there with you. And we ought to take great comfort in that, knowing that we are not alone, but we do have our Lord with us. Now consider for a moment, as easy as it's been for us to feel discouraged and feel isolated, what about them? What about the people around us who don't have that promise? They've been lonely like never before. Like never before, the world around us needs the good news of the promises of Jesus Christ. Amen. This guy that I've been going to Africa with for 4 or 5 years now, however long it's been, one of the things he often says, so much so when the African brethren imitate him, this is the saying they use: plant, plant, plant. And you see him in the springtime on Facebook, saying, do what I do. Take a seed, put it in the ground, grow food. You want okra? Plant okra. Don't plant just a little bit of okra, plant a lot of okra. And then save your seeds and plant some more. You want watermelons? Plant watermelons. Because you can't eat what you don't plant. Plant, plant, plant. Here's the thing, that works for food, the food that we're teaching these guys to raise. But it also works with the gospel of Christ. Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 and 9, the Apostle Paul says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. You can't harvest what you don't plant. Notice what he says in verse 9. Let us not grow weary in well-doing. Let's don't get discouraged. Let's don't grow tired in doing the good work. Keep doing the good work. Why? For in due season, that is at the proper time. When is the proper time for the harvest? Don't know. But the Lord of the harvest knows. And he says, when that proper time comes, you shall reap, if we faint not. If we don't get discouraged and we don't give up and we don't quit, we keep planting the seed, the Lord of the harvest has said the harvest will Plant, plant, plant. I'll tell you a little bit about, just by way of brief reminder, the places where we work. There are now 4 places where we have preaching schools: Uganda, Cameroon, Tanzania, and Nepal. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about that 4th one here in just a minute. Of course, that oldest school, the one that Greg helped to build with his own bare hands there in Uganda, was established in 2015. Self-sufficient for food, water, and electricity, has housing for 20 students. The main crop there is vanilla. Also raising some food crops there, raising okra and corn and cassava, things like that, raising some goats and ducks and chickens. Total operating cost for that school is $1,900 a month. That's not bad for an entire school of preaching. And we have hopes that with the change in directorship and the change in vision and direction that we're going, and with that first vanilla harvest that we're praying for, that will radically change. Then we have the Model A School of Preaching in northwest Cameroon, like the one in Uganda, self-sufficient for food, water, and electricity, has housing for 20 students. The main crop there has been bananas. This last year, Nepal's also added corn and beans as good crops. Last month, he brought in a good harvest of corn, set it aside. He's waiting. When everybody else's corn sells out in the marketplace, he's going to bring his corn. When you're the only person selling corn, you can get a good price for it. And that school, we've had 2 graduations now. It was either last week or the week before, we had 3 students graduate from that school. 4 years of operation now, and we're fixing to intake another class. The total operating budget for that school has been $500 a month until this month. As of this month, it goes to 0. And with prayers, with hopefully the implementation of the things we've been working toward, that school continue to go on and go well. We're going to continue to aid and support that school as we can and be there for them. And I'm excited that those funds are freed up because of the things we'll be able to do with them in other places. Then we have the Talawanda School of Preaching in the coastal plains of Tanzania. It's in an area that's predominantly controlled by Muslims. That school, self-sufficient for food, water, and electricity, has housing for 20 students and their families. That's one of the things, as the academic director, that I've really insisted on, is I want the wives to come to school too. There are certain classes I want the wives to take so they can study and learn and grow alongside their husbands. Because when they go out in the villages, guess what? It's going to be the 2 of them working together. So I want them to learn and grow together. And that's something that we're hoping to be able to retrofit in our other schools. But there at Talawanda, we have housing for 20 students and their families. The main crop there has been corn. This year, we've also added pigs as a major crop. We are doing a great business selling pork in the Muslim food markets to support the spread of the gospel. Wonderful thing. And then we have our 4th school. Way back at the very beginning of the Manna project, it's one of the first places Gage went was to Nepal, and have conducted seminars there on agriculture and different things, taught classes online. There's been kind of a night school going on there in Nepal all this while. But within the last few months, the brethren in Nepal have approached us and they said, we need a full-time school. We want a school like the schools you have in Africa. And they've donated the land and the facilities where that can happen. And so with that, we are working now on making plans in the first part of next year to go to Nepal and work on getting that off the ground and running. We're excited about the opportunity there. Joppa is in the far eastern end of Nepal. It's kind of the trade gateway with India. A lot of Silk Road traffic, not the website, but the ancient trade route, travels through there from Joppa. And so it can reach not just people from Nepal, but from other countries of India and Pakistan and Afghanistan. There's a lot of countries right there where people can come and study. So we're excited about those opportunities. A little bit about the fruit of these labors. Of course, the Nzori School of Preaching in Uganda, y'all have heard a lot about it over the years, I'm sure, and with good reason. Here's Jealous, our farm manager, pollinating the vanilla. And it's a very labor-intensive crop. For every single pot of vanilla beans that you see, there's a flower that was pollinated by hand. And so Jealous is there pollinating those and teaching others on how to do it. He's been trained on that. And this last year there was a challenge. There was a disease that came through the mountains and wiped out most people's vanilla crops. We lost 2 vines through careful care and perhaps the providence of God. And so our harvest wasn't very great last year. It was supposed to be our first harvest, but Lord willing, this next harvest will be good, and that will radically change the finances for that school. Of course, Uganda has the world record for the longest COVID lockdown. They've experienced in total about 18 months of hard lockdown. That's not a record you want.
No.
But in the midst of all of that, our students and faculty have been busy. One of the places they went is the village of Kazaroho, which is right on the border of Congo and Bundi-Bujo district. Matter of fact, that mountain you see there is in Congo. At the bottom of that mountain is a river that's the border between Uganda and Congo. I wanted to go down there and see that river, and Musa said no, because the rebels are in control of that mountain. If you get too close to it, they might shoot you. I said, okay, I'll stop here. But that river is where the village of Kazaroho gets their water to drink. It's where they bathe, where they wash their clothes and their dishes and all of those things. Every day they take that risk. But at the beginning of this year, some of our students and graduates went there to Kazaroho and planted a congregation. There's a congregation, 40 Christians there in Kazaroho that weren't there at the beginning of the year. And during the COVID lockdowns, when they weren't allowed really to move around and evangelize at all in Uganda, they just shifted across the border to Congo. There's civil war over there, no lockdowns. And so in the midst of that conflict zone, they planted 5 congregations. And since then, the conflict has gotten a little bit worse. Civilians have started to be targeted, mostly for fun and sport, actually. And so by the thousands, refugees have flooded across the border to Uganda from Congo. And so of those 5 Congolese congregations, 4 of them are now completely within the borders of Uganda. That new congregation, Kazaroho, is hosting 120 saints, the refugees from Congo. And they came across the border with just the clothes on their backs. Before we left this spring, somebody brought me a couple of trash bags full of clothes bound for Goodwill. He said, "Can you use these?" I said, "Sure," threw them in my bag. Took them with me to Kazaroho. Brothers and sisters, they were so grateful to receive those things. Compared to what they had, which was all they had, this was really nice stuff. I was also able to give them some cassava flour. You know, cassava, that's what the poor people eat. If you can't afford to eat anything else, you can eat cassava. You hear people complaining, "I've been so poor, things have been so hard, all I could eat was cassava." It's a fruit, it's a plant that's native to Africa. The whole thing from the bottom of the root to the tip of the leaf is edible, but mostly it's the roots that are ground into flour and eaten. It's gluten-free, by the way, so you can buy it at Walmart. It's really expensive. When I tell them how much we pay for it here, they laugh. But I was able to give them some cassava flour, enough to get them by for about 2 months, hopefully get them established in Uganda as they try to figure out what to do. Jealous, when he first came to us, it was when the school was being built, right? He came looking for work and learned the gospel, became a Christian. During the lockdowns, he went back home to his village of Chinika. There wasn't a church there, so he started evangelizing. And by the way, that's the main road to the village of Chinika. When we came to that bridge, the guy who I was riding on his motorcycle, he made me get off. He didn't think that bridge could hold us both. And so we got up there to Chinika, and Jealous had planted a congregation, about 30 Christians there worshiping. And one of the new Christians said, "We need a place to worship, I'll donate some land." So they donated the land, and a building was built. When I say a building, think like a run-in shelter for a horse. That's about what they built. But it works, and they're there, and the church continues to grow. Just down the hill from Chinika is the town of Nyambuko. Now let me see if I get these names right. 3 of our graduates came to Nyambuko when they heard we were going to be there to meet with us. We've got Kool-Aid Jimmy, and then Josephat, and then Ronald. Ronald was one of the graduates from the first class, so he graduated just before I got to Uganda the first time. But Jimmy and Josephat graduated in January of 2020. Jimmy, when he left school, went to Ibanda district, established a congregation there. There wasn't one there. And that congregation is doing well, and he's gone on and is helping to establish other congregations elsewhere in the mountains. Josephat, when he graduated, went to help to establish a congregation in the town of Kidodo. That congregation is just finishing up building their building. They're doing well, over 100 people meeting there. And Josephat's moved on, helping to establish some other churches. And Ronald has been doing a lot of work in Bundi-Bujo district. He was one of the ones instrumental there at Kazaroa. Sunday morning, before we left to go spend the day riding up in the mountains to Chinika and Yambuco, Jovia, one of the hotel workers, right? It's Jovia, came to Greg and said, "Can you study the Bible with me?" And we said, "Sure. Tonight when we get back, we'll study." When we got back, there were 15 hotel workers sitting in that balcony waiting to study. There's not 15 in that picture because that was the entire hotel staff. So every now and then one of them had to get up and tend to this or that. But as we studied, they asked questions. You know, talk about, well, I see the Anglican Church and the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Pentecostal Church and the Church of Christ. What's the difference? And why all the differences? And does it matter? How do we know what's right? And so we talked about 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10 and Paul's plea for unity. We need to all speak the same thing, be of the same mind, and the same judgment. And that if two people disagree on matters of doctrine, they can't both be right, but they can both be wrong. The only way for us to all be right is to all come to agree with the truth. And some of the questions that were being asked, I think by the time we concluded that study, we ran out of time. Jovia, another one of the ladies there, I think we're very close to the kingdom. Agnes, thank you. And so we left them in the capable hands of Mbusa to continue following up with them. And about the time we were wrapping that up, a car came to the gate and started honking. That was Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a Christian, and she heard that we were going to be there, so she rented a car and came to get us. And said, "Can you come to my house? My husband, Crispus, is a faithful Anglican. He's not a Christian. Can you come study with him?" And so we jumped into Elizabeth's car and drove off into the night. Went to their home, shared a lovely meal with her and her children. Her oldest daughter is a nurse. She was working as a volunteer in a COVID clinic. Hadn't seen any patients in a couple weeks. It was kind of nice. And as we were talking to Crispus, he asked a lot of the same questions that the hotel staff had asked. We had a lot of the same conversations. And as we were talking about the organization of the church and the one church that Jesus built, we talked about, you know, the idea of having elders and deacons. And we held up as an example the church in Maliba Village. He said, "Maliba Village? I'm from Maliba Village." I said, "Really, we were just there yesterday." And as we're talking about elders, we talked about Solomon, one of the elders there in Maliba. I really like Solomon. I think he lives up to his name. And Crispus said, "I know Solomon. He's a good man." I said, "That's right, because he's following Jesus Christ." And he said, I'm going to go talk to Solomon about these things and continue learning about this church. And all of that because his wife cared and brought us to study with him.
Didn't ask for money.
No, wouldn't take it. And as Greg mentioned, Kitoko. Tom took us to Kitoko, and before we went, you know, we had heard that there were 200 Christians meeting way up there at the summit of the Rwenzori Mountains, about 6,500 feet in elevation. Both of us thought, no way. So we got up there. You see this fine brick building with the tarp for the roof? Here's the thing about that building. There's not a single penny of American money in that building. Those Christians have made the bricks. They've done the work. They pulled that building up out of the dirt. They've got it up to the ring beam. They're working now on saving, getting things together, hopefully set rafters and put a roof on it. But that's the goal, is to have these congregations that are self-sufficient. And we got up there to Kitoko, and there were 200 Christians there waiting for us. And the first thing Tom did was he apologized to us. He said, "As you know, the lockdowns have been lifted. That's why you're here. And the schools have opened again. So we have about 80 students who have gone back to school. Otherwise, they would be here too." And we looked at Tom and said, "How in the world have you done all this way up here?" He said, "I haven't done it by myself." He wanted us to meet these guys that Greg was talking about. These are all men that Tom shared the gospel with. And after he taught them the gospel, he kept taking them with him and training them and bringing them on Bible studies. And then those guys had crawled all over those mountainsides and valleys, setting the place on fire with the gospel. And that church has grown. And I think sometimes we get the idea you have to go to a preaching school to be able to evangelize. And don't get me wrong, I'm thankful for our preaching schools. I'm thankful for Brown Trail and the good training that Tyler's getting. But you don't. You just need to know what you know and be able to share that with others.
Amen.
If that'll work in the mountains of Uganda, I think it'll work here in North Texas. Our third graduation there at Rwenzori is scheduled for January. We have 13 students graduating. We should have already bought our tickets to go. But there's an Ebola outbreak. There are now 9 districts affected, roughly 150 cases, over 40 deaths. It's in Bundibujo district, there where Casa Rojo is. It's in Mubinde district, where Greg likes to stop and get chicken on a stick. You can't get to Kisesi without going through Mubinde. It's also in Kampala and Entebbe, the capital, the major cities there in the country. And Uganda is applying some of the lessons they've learned from COVID. And so they have implemented hard lockdowns to stop Ebola. And I pray that that works. But it's also going to bring back with it the suffering and the hunger that the lockdowns brought last time. We need to be praying about that. But whether it's there in Uganda or whether it's here in North Texas, we need to plant, plant, plant. Don't get discouraged. Don't quit. Don't give up. Keep sowing the seed because the harvest will come. Tell you a little bit about Talawanda School of Preaching and the fruit of the labors there in Tanzania. As Greg mentioned, we're raising pigs. You know, the big problem we've had with the pigs is they've done too well. So we've had to expand the pig barn twice. The pigs paid for both those expansions. And then it still wasn't enough, so the pigs built themselves a new barn at the back of the farm. And now the old pig barn is a chicken coop. And now we're also raising chickens and selling the eggs and some of the meat at market. And it's a wonderful thing. You know, during the month of Ramadan, when the Muslims are fasting, our pork sales go way down. But other than that, it's doing really good and on a good track to, I think, help that school be self-supporting. And one of the things that we're doing there, Maurice's brother Julius, right next door, is running an orphanage. And he's got about 15 kids there, giving them a place to live, clothes, sending them to school, teaching them the gospel, all of those things. And we do everything together. When we have a devotion there at the school, the kids come over and worship with us. And the principles of farming that we're teaching there at the school, they're using there at the orphanage. And so while we were there, Mr. Peter, who's there with the kids at the orphanage, was there digging under the tree in the garden with these kids, and he heard something up in the tree. There's a swarm of bees up there. And so I grabbed a couple of bee suits that I brought for such an occasion, grabbed Gaston and put a bee suit on him, and we climbed up that nice sturdy ladder and started getting those bees. Gaston did pretty good until I started throwing handfuls of bees at him. But we got the bees down. Mr. Peter was excited because him and the kids could keep working in the garden. And now we have not 1 but 2 active hives there on the farm, pollinating our crops. And Lord willing, we'll get a pretty sweet harvest out of it in a few months. You know, we have a 2-year program. We usually have a graduation every 2 years, but we've had a graduation 2 years in a row there at Talawanda because of Epiphanos and Goya. When me and Greg first met him, he was a fire gospel Pentecostal preacher, telling us about how he could speak in tongues and the healings that he'd performed and the miracles he'd seen and all of these things. And we were studying with him, we talked about authority. We talked about the fact that the Holy Spirit revealed the Scriptures. And that same Holy Spirit is not later going to say or do something that contradicts what He wrote in the Bible. And over a period of weeks, we continued studying with him, and eventually he made the decision that he needed to be baptized into Christ, have his sins washed away. He was preaching for a congregation of over 200 in the town of Morogoro. And he said, I have a problem. I need to go to preaching school. I don't know enough to teach these people. We said, that's great. Another year we'll have an intake. You can come. He said, no, I need to learn now. I can't wait. These people are looking to me to teach them. So we made an exception for him. So he did the second year first and the first year second. He came to school. And he took us to that congregation he'd been preaching for, and the gospel was shared. Almost all of them became Christians. And then he took us to 5 other congregations in that fellowship, shared the gospel with them. Almost all of them became Christians. 6 new congregations of the Lord's church because of Epiphanos. And here he is at graduation reciting from memory the entirety of Acts chapter 2. Place a heavy emphasis on memory work. So when these guys go out into the village, they have what they need to be able to share the gospel. These 2 Maasai that are there with Epiphanos, they're both Christians because of his influence in their lives.
One's his wife.
Yes. And Epiphanos and his wife, they've gone back there to Morogoro to work with that congregation. They've also taken an orphan into their home and are providing for him and teaching him. And there in this other picture, almost off the far edge of the screen there is Alex. Alex is one of the graduates from our first class. His father was a Pentecostal preacher, sent him to our school to learn the Bible, and he did. He became a Christian. He's gone back to Pingo Village and has established a congregation. Talked to the village elders, they gave him land, a building has been built, and there are now 30 souls meeting and worshiping there in Pingo Village and growing. And he's continuing to work with us there at the school. Another one of our students, Joseph Gazidi, had contacts in the village of Mindukini. And so we went to Mindukini and began evangelizing and knocking doors and things like that, and talked to the village elders. They gave us a place. We erected this fine structure here for a church building. Sunday morning we put the tarps on, and worship would get done, take the tarps down. And while we were there were a number of souls there worshiping who were not Christians, but had been coming and learning and studying, and they were on the path. Right next door, you can almost see it there on the edge of the screen, there's something kind of like a cafe. And there's a woman sitting in that cafe cooking and getting ready for the lunchtime rush. And during worship services, a question was asked, she would answer it. Something was said, she would amen it. At the end of the worship services, Joseph Kazidi gets up and he says, you know, we have our traditional religions. We go to the cemetery and we pray to our ancestors and ask them to help us. He says, you need to leave that foolishness behind. Because your ancestors can't give you heaven, only Jesus can give you heaven. You need to leave that foolishness and follow Jesus Christ. Who's ready to become a Christian? Who's ready to follow Jesus? And hands went up. And so we went to the water, and 8 souls were baptized into Christ. One of them was that woman in that cafe. She missed the lunch rush. But she earned her soul's salvation, or gained it rather. And this was the beginning of the Mindukini Church of Christ. That was in July. There are now 16 Christians meeting there in the village of Mindukini. We had plans after leaving Mindukini to go to Pingo Village and meet that new church that Alex has established. So we haven't got to meet yet. But there were problems and miscommunications and this and that didn't work out. Meanwhile, Maurice was getting a phone call from Filbert. Filbert is in the Tanzanian army. He's a Christian. And he said, I really need you to come to the city of Msada and meet with me. And Msada has not just one, but 2 paved roads, and they intersect. Big stuff. So we went to Msada to meet with Filbert, and Filbert said, I have a problem. I have not been living like I should. I have not been worshiping like I should. I've not been faithful to Jesus Christ.
One on the left.
Yes. Yeah, the one in the white and blue shirt is Filbert. And so we spent some time talking to Filbert and studying with him, and we prayed together. He was restored, and he said, I have another problem. I have searched, and there's not a church here at Msada. But I have a plan. I'm saving money. I'm going to buy a plot of land where we can build a church building. But I can't do it on my own. I need help. Maurice said, that's okay. I'm in the preacher business. And so every Lord's Day since then, we have sent at least 2 students to Msada to go and worship with Filbert and evangelize and knock doors with him, beginning with his family. And since that time, there have been 7 souls baptized into Christ or restored to faithfulness, and several more who are coming and worshiping. Whether it's in Uganda, whether it's in Tanzania, whether it's here in North Texas, plant, plant, plant. The God of the harvest has promised that the harvest will come. During COVID, one of the things that I figured out was that while the whole rest of the world was shut down, Istanbul was wide open. That was the key to get everywhere else. If we could get there, we could go other places. And so last year, while we were in Istanbul, we had some opportunities, and we met with Jeff Buludan. Jeff is a refugee from Iran, and he's living there in Istanbul with his wife and daughter. And he's Persian by birth. You know, the Medes and the Persians, that's his people. And he's studying English so he can read the Bible. And as we were sitting there talking to him, it came up that his native language was Farsi. And my wife Leah looked at her phone and she said, well, here's a Bible in Farsi. It's free. You can download it. He said, absolutely not. Because most of the Bibles that are in my language are published by the Iranian government. If I download that here, they'll come find me here. They'll get me. So he's studying English so he can read the Bible. Sometimes we have a hard time opening our Bibles. What's our excuse? And so we gave him a Bible, gave him a flash drive with a number of resources. One of them is the study that we have there at Manna Project, The Truth About Islam, starts in the Quran. talks about how the Quran says that Jesus Christ and the apostles are prophets from God. And that if you don't listen to the wisdom revealed in the Gospels, you're a fool. And if you follow the Gospels, you have heaven. But that Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father if not by me. And we gave him some of those resources. We continued to keep in contact with him and study. This year we went back, and while we were in Istanbul, we were able to spend some time meeting with Jeff and with his wife and daughter. And one of the things I talked to him about was helping me to translate some of those things into Farsi, so that he would have those, his wife would have them, and perhaps they could go into places that we can't go. Another individual that we met with in Istanbul was Ekrem. Ekrem's a civil engineer. His wife's a faithful Muslim. He had some questions and some problems with that. And so we met with him after making contact and studying online, and gave him a Bible. And he was asking about the differences between Islam and Christianity. We talked about truth, the fact that truth loves to be questioned, loves to be challenged, because it's always proven true. And we continued to study and correspond. This year while we were there, he wanted to show us the Prince Islands, which is very near to his home. And as we're hiking to the summit of this island, there's a monastery there at the top of the hill. And at the bottom of the hill, there's a shop selling lots of little trinkets and things. And you get up to the hill, the trees are covered in them. And there's not a leaf that doesn't have a trinket tied to it. I said, Jeff, what is all this? Or Ekrem, sorry. Ekrem, what is all this? He said, well, those are prayers. You know, if you want more money, you buy this thing and tie it to the tree. If you want a baby, you buy this thing and tie it to the tree. I said, well, that one's the lid to a beer bottle. What's that? He said, well, I don't think it's a good prayer. He said, but here's the thing. I understand now that Christianity is the right way, but there's so many. There's the Anglican Church, and there's the Catholic Church, and there's the Pentecostal Church, and they're all so different. Why is it so confusing, and how do you know what's right? And so we had kind of that same conversation with him, and I had thought ahead, and I had used Google Translate, and translated some studies into Turkish for Ekrem. And I gave those to him, and he was looking at it, and he said, these translations are garbage, don't use this. But can I help you translate them into Turkish? Because as I translate it, I can learn, and then I'll have something that I can use to share with other people. And so, at his request, I've been laboring to that end. Also last year, we spent a little bit of time in Kyiv, Ukraine, at the invitation of a now passed on gospel preacher. Walking around that table, in the green jacket there at the bottom of the screen is Alexander. Alexander's a gospel preacher from Crimea. He fled Crimea when Putin came in there, moved to Kyiv with his family, where he was there living and working and evangelizing. Last time I heard from him was several months ago. We were able to get his oldest daughter to safety in Poland. His wife and young daughter, last I heard, were trapped in Kyiv, and he was deployed with the Ukrainian army. I don't know where he is now. The reason why we were there is the gentleman in the black. He is the son-in-law of Leon, the gospel preacher. His wife, Natasha, there next to him, grew up in the church but married outside the body. He was too busy for silly things like God and church. And he wouldn't listen to his wife and his father-in-law. But if an American came halfway around the world, he'd sit down with them. So we did whatever it takes to reach one soul. It's worth it. And so we were studying about those things. That gentleman, of course, now is deployed with the Ukrainian army. Don't know where he is. At the back of the room in the blue jean jacket is his nephew, Kirill. Kirill's mother, Tanya, had had enough. After the Crimea thing, she says, that's it, I'm out. She left, went to Lisbon, Portugal. And a couple of months after we were there in Kyiv, Kirill moved to Lisbon to be there with his mom. And he wrote to us shortly after and said, I have a problem. I can't find a church here. Could you please come and help us? And so we made plans. And we got to Lisbon about the time that Putin got to Kyiv. And there we are with Kirill and Tanya, and that gentleman in the middle of that's Yusos. He's a brother from Lithuania, gospel preacher. He does have 2 legs. It's just kind of a weird picture. But we were there at Kirill's request, and we arrived the same day as Kirill's girlfriend, Yana. Yana is not a Christian. She is raised in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Her father, being a man, not allowed to leave the country. Her mother would not leave without her husband. So they put their teenage daughter on a bus, sent her to Portugal to live with her boyfriend. Took her 5 days to make that journey. She got there just hours before we did. And as we, on Sunday morning, worshipped with Tanya and Kirill and Yana, Tanya wept tears of joy. It had been over a year since she'd been able to sit with another Christian and observe the Lord's Supper. And we talked about the village of Talawanda, how when we first got to Talawanda, Tanzania, there are only 2 Christians in town. We brought both of them with us. And Kirill and Tanya said, we're ready. We can do that here. And Facebook's a funny thing. You know, a connection from Nepal. The brethren in Nepal saw on Facebook that we were in Lisbon, and they contacted us. They said, there's some members of the church from Nepal who've been living in Kyiv, Ukraine, and they're now on their way to Lisbon looking for safety. And so we made that mutual connection, and now there is a church of Ukrainians and Nepalese that speak Russian spreading the gospel in Lisbon, Portugal. Plant, plant, plant. And I know sometimes it feels like those things are a world away from here. And you think, well, that's all great, Justin, but that's over there in those places, in those situations. People aren't interested. Here it won't work. This summer in Itasca, we had our first area-wide singing. An out-of-duty Christian came to that singing with his family. And afterwards, he came and he said, my teenage daughter, Natalie, needs to be baptized. I said, that's great, brother. Can we get together next week and study about that? He said, yeah. So we did, and we met, and we talked, and he told me, I don't think I'm in a right place right now. And so we talked about those things, and studied, and we prayed, and he was restored. And his daughter Natalie and his wife Dawn continued studying with us over a number of weeks, and as we studied, his wife said, I never knew that about the church, and that makes sense about why you don't use instruments, because we're following the New Testament pattern, not the Old Testament pattern. And I didn't know about why there's so many different churches. That makes sense now. And after a few weeks, both Dawn and Natalie said, we need to wash our sins away and be added to the church. We went across the street to the neighbor's pool and did just that. Sometimes it's a very international affair. Greg will remember in April, we left Dallas Sunday night, landed in Entebbe before dawn on Tuesday morning, got in the car and drove all day. Got to Kisesi just in time to have dinner and fall into bed. And after dinner, I go to my hotel room. As I close my door, my phone goes ding! And it's a lady named Christine from Boston, Massachusetts. Apparently, we had some mutual Facebook friends. And she said, I'm a devout Catholic. I go to Mass every day. And I have some questions about the Bible, and my priest won't answer them. I see that you're a pastor. Can you answer them? I said, I love talking about the Bible. Christine, let's talk. And so over a number of weeks, we studied the Bible through Facebook Messenger. And a couple weeks later, she messaged me. She said, we're building a retirement home in Bangor, Maine, and I'm up here, and I found the Bangor Church of Christ. I think I'm going to go check it out. I said, that's great. And so she went and she worshiped there, and she showed me back the next day. She said, this was so amazing. All the people were so friendly. The preacher and his wife had us over for lunch, and they made plans with us for next week. I've never been loved like this before. I want to be part of a church that loves like that. Sometime later, she was back home in Boston, and she messaged me. She said, I need to be added to the one true church. I need to have my sins washed away. How do I do that? And so we did some searching, made some connections, and that evening, church building was open and her sins were washed away. And she wrote back to me. She said, I'm concerned about my husband Sam. I've been trying for years to get him to come to Mass with me. He's just not interested in religion. Meanwhile, Sam messaged me. He said, hey, Justin, I want to learn the things that Christine learned. I want to be the next one that's baptized. I said, well, that's great, Sam. Let's do that. And so we started trying to make plans and this and that. He's a very busy guy and he works a lot. And I just never could nail him down. And I thought, well, maybe Christine's right. Maybe he's just not interested. Brothers and sisters, let's be very careful about not throwing souls away. In August, I was traveling to Tennessee for polishing the pulpit, and I messaged Sam. I said, I don't know a lot about Massachusetts, and I realize it's not in Tennessee. But Tennessee is closer to it than Texas. I'm going to be in Tennessee next week. He said, funny thing about that, we're traveling to Florida to take our daughter to an internship. We'll rebook our flights home. So they changed their flights, rented a car, and got a hotel for 2 days, spent 2 days in Tennessee studying the Bible with us. Tell me people here aren't interested. All the trouble and expense they went to get there. And while we were studying, Sam kept saying, see, See, Christine, this is what I've been looking at. This is what I've been telling you. This is what's right. And we took him down to the buildings of the Sevierville Church of Christ, and he was baptized into the Lord's body. And their goal after they got home was to begin sharing what they now know with their 4 children. Plant, plant, plant. Whether it's halfway around the world or whether it's here in the United States, whether it's here in the United States from halfway around the world, sow the seed, and at the right time, the harvest will come. Things we have upcoming. Have funds to raise to be able to continue to do the things that we do. Really do appreciate y'all's fellowship in our work. While we're at home, we're focused on local evangelism. We have a number of Bible studies ongoing and a list of others to continue with. 2023, planning to go, well, we thought Uganda in January. I suppose not. Tanzania. Also Nepal, other foreign mission trips, producing training materials in Swahili and other languages that can be used. If you haven't done so, check out our website, mannafarm.org, subscribe to our email list, like and follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Manna Project Church of Christ. We do need 5 or 9 congregations or individuals to have fellowship with us for $5,000 one time, about $400 or $500 a month. That'll fully fund all the things that we have planned. And as this congregation well knows, it's not about the money. It's about the fruit. And when a church embraces mission work and gets involved in spreading the gospel in other places, it does funny things to the church here. And the church here is benefited and blessed by that work, as you all well know. And so I want to express my heartfelt thanks for your continued fellowship, for your prayers. Taking our names before the God of heaven and earth makes a difference. Your words of encouragement help a lot. Really do appreciate your fellowship. And I'm not going to run off in a big hurry. If you have other questions, if you want to hear the real story about what Greg does when we're in Africa, let me know. But wherever we go, whatever we're doing, let's stay focused. Let's don't grow weary in well-doing. Because in due time, we will reap if we faint not. What about you this evening? Do you have a need? This evening, maybe you realize that you need prayers. Prayers for forgiveness, prayers for strength or courage for something or somebody else. Maybe you're not yet a part of that body. Don't go home with that. Make that right. If there's something we can do, if you have a need, won't you let it be known while we stand and while we sing.